program. Years ago, we started on Yom Kippur offering an opportunity for members of our congregation to speak and share stories of inspiration. And so some of it was based on what people were doing professionally or how they were volunteering their time or interesting life experiences that had happened. And I'm going to flash back in my own life when I was, I think probably 7 or 8. We went to services pretty regularly. I would go to Torah study with my mom on Shabbat morning. And I clearly remember there was a Shabbat morning where, as part of the service, and I had never seen this before, somebody who had converted to Judaism was called up on the bima and given a special blessing. And I remember at a young age feeling so taken by seeing that, and how inspired I was in my own faith, considering for the first time in a practical way, because I was seeing it, that somebody else wants to become Jewish who's not Jewish, right? It wasn't something that I had learned about before. And thinking it was so neat at the time. This was really neat to see somebody ascend the steps of the pulpit that had been my family's congregational home for generations, and somebody say that this is what I want, and having gone through a process, and to watch them be blessed. And it touched my heart, and I've never forgotten it. And so one of the great blessings of my work here is that I'm the clergy member who, if somebody expresses interest in conversion to Judaism, I'm the initial contact for those individuals. So I get to hear lots of life stories and to sit with people who are sometimes for the first time in their life saying out loud to another human being that they want to become Jewish, or to talk about this yearning that they've had inside of them. And I count all of our students among my sort of Jewish babies, a way that I contribute to the world. And so today I get to celebrate some of my Jewish babies, and in this whole sense and realm of sacred belonging, recognizing that our community here at Emmanuel is not just made up of Jews, right? Yes, mostly Jews, many Jews, but lots of individuals who are part of our community because they're part of Jewish families. And the second story I want to share is from early in my tenure here at the congregation. And I knew that we made no distinction here at Emmanuel when it came to bar and bat mitzvah families about if parents were Jewish or not Jewish, that when families and children were celebrating and they were Jewish, that we wanted everyone on the bima, we wanted everyone passing Torah, we made no distinction. So much so that the only way I ever knew if a bar and bat mitzvah student had a non-Jewish parent was at the very end, towards the end of the service, when Rabbi Walter would do a Hebrew blessing and would say the child's Hebrew name. It wasn't even in English at that point. And just because I know sort of the convention of how we name our children, sometimes there was a name that was the child's Hebrew name, son or daughter, bar or bat, only one Hebrew name. And that's the only way in many circumstances that I knew that a member of that family wasn't Jewish. And I think many in the congregation never knew. And it's not that it was ever a secret, but that the message was very clear from this pulpit in how we celebrated ritual. That every family in this congregation who is a part of us comes with love, intention, and connectedness, regardless of their religious identity. And that having one Jewish parent or two Jewish parents, that there was no difference. And so today in our conversation, we celebrate that. And we celebrate this sense that we are a big tent, and that the more diverse our tent, the greater and the stronger we are. So I want to give time to our 4 fabulous speakers. When they begin, I want them just to introduce themselves and say their name, because we don't have their names printed anywhere. And first, I just want to thank the four of you for being willing to tell your story. I think it's courageous. And the reason that our congregation, in case you were wondering, the reason our congregation doesn't call somebody up on the bima and bless them publicly when they convert to Judaism is because of the mitzvah in Judaism that when you're a Jew, you're a Jew, you're a Jew. That there is no differentiation, however you came to Judaism. And what I like to say, whether you're a Jew by choice or a Jew by chance, when you're Jewish, you're part of the club. And now, with this idea of sacred belonging, when you're part of a Jewish family, you're also part of our club. So, without further ado, Geraldine, I'm going to ask you to come up first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Geraldine Domery. So when Rabbi Silk first reached out to me back in July to speak to you today about converting to Judaism, my first reaction was panic. I certainly don't consider public speaking as a strength and felt really shy about sharing my story. The second emotion was doubt. I converted to Judaism as an adult and found myself asking, what makes me truly Jewish? Am I truly Jewish? After all, I thought, I don't regularly attend services. My children know more Hebrew and prayers than I do, and I have yet to master making matzo ball soup. After some procrastination, perhaps slightly avoiding Rabbi Silk, and quite a bit of reflection, I felt ready to share my story about what brought me to Judaism as an adult. I grew up for the first 8 years of my life in Belgium, a country separated by languages but unified by the common religion of Roman Catholicism. Growing up Catholic in Belgium did not take much effort since facets of the religion were present everywhere. Churches in every single small town and the majority of the schools were religious, with catechism drilled in at a very young age. When I was 8 years old, my dad's work transferred him to Houston. Needless to say, everything was just a bit different here in Texas, including the practice of religion. I can't remember where or when we started attending masses in the United States, but I certainly remember how different the experience was here in Texas compared to Europe. People attending seemed more captivated and taken with their religion, which was certainly different than my secular Catholic. My college roommates were an interesting and diverse mix of Christians, agnostic, and Jewish women. It was time to learn and broaden my horizons. It was there that I tried new things like sailing, rowing, and linear algebra, though not always successful at any of those. The most important learning was not necessarily in the classroom, but in the exposure of those of diverse backgrounds. During those late nights, while I shared my Belgian Easter chocolate and listening to the prayers, I gazed in amazement at the freedom of discussion during this Seder. Questions were welcome and even encouraged, with each person contributing their own thoughts and ideas. It certainly made for a more thoughtful celebration of the holiday. It was probably the first time that I had experienced a holiday where I felt a connection to the meaning of it and possibly to something deeper within myself. I was invited to my first bar mitzvah, as well as a Jewish wedding, and although more of an observer than a participant, I was moved by these experiences as I observed the strength of community and family. With these new experiences, I entered medical school where I met Molly. Her dynamic and warm personality made her a quick friend. Molly had grown up Jewish and welcomed my questions about her practice of religion and kindled my interest even more. She wanted to relearn and reconnect with her own faith, and I wanted to learn about Judaism. She welcomed the challenges of my questions. Together, we would attend the Sunday morning sessions of basic Judaism here at Emanu. We were taken through the history of Jewish people, celebrations, and life cycle. Molly rekindled her love of Judaism with the classes, and I started falling in love with it. She was and continues to be a fantastic mentor, welcoming, warm, enthusiastic, and always making sure I have a place at her table for holiday celebrations. I went to my first service here at Emanu with Molly, where I found each person had their own definition and interpretation of faith. Recently, she jokingly shared with me that she must not be such a good Jew because she doesn't go to services regularly. But for me, as my willing and compassionate teacher and guide through this journey, I found the true spirit of Judaism in her. It was also in medical school that I met Wes. Our love of classic rock, Springsteen and Fleetwood Mac for me, and Ozzy for him, and his sense of humor brought us together. I had met my match, someone who knew just how and when to push back, allowing me to grow. He had been raised as a Jew and believed in God, but his family was more secular. Eager to supplement his sparse religious upbringing, I shared much of my knowledge from basic Judaism class. Together, we cobbled together aspects of Judaism that we found meaningful into our lives. Prayers for Shabbat, even though we didn't own a Kiddush cup. A mezuzah brought back from a trip to the Czech Republic. Visit to synagogues during international trips, and even our version of Tashlik. During a busy residency, we would take a walk to Boathouse Row in Philadelphia, where we could reflect on the year and think about the future and aspire to do better. Even for our wedding, we attempted to stay as true to Jewish tradition as possible, including a ketubah, a huppah, Jewish blessings, and breaking of a glass. I had started thinking about the process of a conversion, but really was not sure what that would entail. After what was now nearly 10 years of observing, learning, and even participating, I was perhaps ready to take the next step, but still uncertain. Thankfully, following residency in Philadelphia, we were fortunate enough to move back to Houston and reconnect with this community. I attended a new series of basic Judaism classes, this time with Wes and with a new interest in perhaps converting. I met with Rabbi Silk a bit more to discuss conversion, but still did not know if I was ready. I remember discussing this ambivalence with Wes, who always has a wonderful way of breaking down things that seem unsurmountable to their basic pieces. He asked me, "Do you feel like we have a Jewish household now? Do you believe in God? Is part of your goal in life to do mitzvahs, to do good for others, to lead a good life, to give to charity?" As I answered each of these questions, it became clear to me that Judaism would be the path for me to be the person that I wanted to be. One of the key and defining assignments during my conversion process was the assignment of thinking about things that I do daily that are Jewish. At first, I had no idea where to start. With a busy work schedule, going to services and reading something about Judaism were not regular occurrences. But I realized that the list of Jewish things was really quite large. Reading, study, prayer, ritual practice, a profession of service, philanthropy, and even cooking. Through this assignment, I also realized that what I did daily, though not carrying the label of being Jewish, was religious. It was in the way I shaped my interaction with others, showing appreciation, respecting my parents, forgiving people, asking for forgiveness from others, being patient with others, loving my family, and loving my community, engaging in discourse and thoughtful discussions. Feeling Jewish inspired me to do better, to be better and do better. Several months later, and after almost 10 years of soul-searching with Wes, Molly, and Rabbi Silk on my side, I celebrated this feeling by accepting Judaism and promising to establish a Jewish home, participating actively in the life of the Jewish community, and committing myself to the pursuit of Jewish knowledge under the Jewish name of Moriel, meaning God teaches. The last 12 years have been lived in a whirlwind blur. The birth of 2 boys with the ceremonies of Brit Milahs, passing of loved ones, and lighting of yahrzeit candles. Celebrations, ritual practices, hosting Passover Seders, preschool at Becker, consecration, start of religious school, all in the loving embrace of this community. Occasionally, doubt of my Jewish identity does creep in as I wonder if my conversion was truly enough since I wasn't born Jewish. It was only in sitting down to write this and with some probing questions by Rabbi Silk that I came to understand where I am now and perhaps where I am going. 12 years following my conversion, I asked myself, what is being Jewish to me today, and where am I? Being Jewish is celebrating Shabbat every week, the end of the week where we take the time to pause and reflect, the time to appreciate those around us and say thanks. It is a break in the busy schedule to express love for each other and to God for what has been provided. Being Jewish is the love I feel when saying the blessing over my children and tearing up as I close with the words, may God bless you and protect you. May God show you favor and be gracious to you. May God show you kindness and grant you peace. Being Jewish is my work as a physician to watch over the life and health of others, to not be complacent in the knowledge of my field, and to have compassion for others. Being Jewish is my children. It's my 6-year-old joyously singing about the shofar blasts and reminding me to bring tzedakah on Sunday mornings. It's my 11-year-old sharing his newfound knowledge of Hebrew and prayers and having compassion for those in need. Being Jewish is my husband who loves me while always challenging me and who truly makes me a better version of myself. Being Jewish is being here in this space as part of this congregation, whether it's a holiday service or Sunday school tefillah. It is the melodies of the prayers that are humbling and inspire me to do better and be better. Being Jewish is the ability to have faith through learning and debate, the continual process of interpreting religious texts and joining in the debate. I believe I'm Jewish because the process didn't end with my conversion. There will always be learning and questions. Being Jewish is a journey, and as my Jewish name reminds me, God teaches.
Okay. Hi, my name is Malia Kanata, and my journey to Judaism actually begins with the Holocaust. Oh. Okay, my family came to Judaism through my uncle, who was a prisoner of war. He was shot down flying with the British before the war started. And he is very dark-skinned. My family is from Appalachia. My father and my brother and his brother were born on the old reservation, the old Cherokee reservation in eastern Kentucky. So, eastern Tennessee. So they were very dark-skinned, and there was a lot of prejudice at that period of time. So when my uncle was shot down by the Germans on a British bomber, they crashed in Amsterdam, in the tulip fields outside of Amsterdam. And my grandmother, for many years, had a photograph that I didn't see until I was almost an adult, because they didn't talk about this. There was no discussion of it when I was growing up. He was captured and sent to Bergen-Belsen, to the POW camp there. And he was imprisoned with what were termed undesirable prisoners, meaning dark-skinned people, Jews, Christian Scientists. I don't know if there were any other different types of religions, but there were also Master Masons. Now, one of the ways that my father and his brother came above some of the prejudice of the Deep South in Alabama, where I was raised, they were leaned very heavily into their Masonic background, which goes all the way back through my family. So the Masonic Lodge was also hated by the Germans. So there were Masons imprisoned with him as well. And of course, my dad and my brother and his brother had been Masons before the war. So while they were imprisoned, my uncle actually learned Yiddish from his POW fellow captives. And so he came home from the war and he taught it to my dad. Well, along with Yiddish, he brought the principles of Judaism, the faith, Talik Olam. So anyway, years after the war, in Alabama, both my dad and my uncle grew up working for Nazi scientists in the missile programs. So we were, as a family, we were kind of on the outside. I was raised in Masonic organizations. So was my mother. She was a part of Eastern Star. I was in Rainbow. There was a White Shrine affiliation. My father was a Mason and Scottish Rite. So you can see we didn't really need church. I had lots of places to go. The religion that I learned at home was religious practices that, as I began to grow and study Judaism, were directly aligned with Judaism. So for me, it was not converting from something to Judaism. It was a matter of feeling like I came home. Now, long story short, my husband was raised as a non-religious person in fairly Hasidic and very Orthodox beach community called Bradley Beach in New Jersey, where when he was growing up across the street from the synagogue, he was the Shabbos goy to turn on the heat and different things at the synagogue. So he was also raised around Judaism. All his girlfriends, all his friends were all Orthodox. So when we got married and our son was born, I was looking for a system that we could raise our son with the values that we had grown up with. So first we looked at some Christian churches and came away feeling, no, these don't match the values that we were raised with. So just the way things went, we ended up, when my son was 3.5 years old, he was in gymnastics at the JCC. So he was raised on the gymnastics teams there, where I took classes and met many fellow parents in gymnastics and many people at the J. And I volunteered there. I felt like I was part of the community, to the point where there was a kosher chili cook-off, which I'm sure many of you guys have been to. I left out an important part. I'll get back to it. I was at the kosher chili cook-off, and the tents and booths that were set up had people's names. One of them was AE Pi, Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity. I was a little sister for 4 years for AE Pi at Theta Chapter in Auburn, Alabama. And there's a story for how that happened, but I was the only non-Jewish little sister. So I learned so much there. I did not convert. I had friendly lectures from my boyfriend's mom that I needed to think about conversion if I was going to be serious in my relationship. I didn't marry this guy. He was wonderful. My best friend did. So they were still part of my life. And then I went off, graduated from college, came to Houston, met my husband. We were both working at Compaq Computer Corporation at the time. And then we went on to work for Bindview, which was a Jewish-owned business here, the Pulaski family that actually were congregants here years ago. So I was surrounded with Judaism and Jewish friends, and we were raising my son at the J, and I just never got around to coming out from under the fringe of the tent because the tent was so welcoming. And later, it wasn't until the kosher chili cook-off where my fraternity brother said, "Why haven't you converted?" And I had to say, well, I truly thought conversion was for marrying in. And not being from a Jewish background and being raised in Alabama, I didn't have that much guidance. I didn't know that conversion was something that ordinary people could do. So I came to Emmanuel, met Rabbi Silk, went through the conversion process, and haven't left in the years since. My greatest regret was that I did not convert earlier because my son was 4. So my son, although he's grown up around the congregation and around the J and has so many Jewish friends and support system, because he has not converted or thought about it, then my son is not Jewish. And that's my biggest regret. But the warmth and the love of the congregation and support for people who come from definitely odd backgrounds, which I guess mine is, I have been made to feel welcome, and other converts I know have as well. So I'm very, very pleased and proud to be a member of this congregation. And if anybody has any questions about the Masonic Lodge, I'll be happy to tell you. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dina Miller. Did y'all hear Geraldine say that y'all started talking about this in July? Because Rabbi Silk emailed me like 3 weeks ago about being part of this. So I might be like I might have been like the B team. So several weeks ago, Rabbi Silk sent me an email asking if I would consider sharing my story during this portion of services on one of the holiest days of the year. I told her that my story isn't exactly that of Miss Emmanuel. She told me that actually, in a growing Reformed congregation like ours, Miss Emmanuel looks different from what she once did, and that my story does, in fact, illustrate a certain modern-day version. So fresh out of excuses and with the deadline for draft 1 just a few days out, I sat down to write about my non-Jewish Jewish life. As I jotted down notes, I kept coming across a common theme. Sure, the life our family leads is not traditionally Jewish. It is, however, solidly Jew-ish. I grew up outside of Detroit in a middle-class Italian family that sat in the very first row at Catholic Mass every Sunday. I was relatively ignorant of Judaism. While I do know today of the Jewish nation that is West Bloomfield, Michigan, at the time I associated that nearby community more with wealth and not necessarily with Jewishness. And while there's a good chance that my peers, Carrie Stein and Philip Bayer, were taking the day off for Rosh Hashanah from school, I was oblivious. My family moved to Texas when I was 16. In building friendships with a handful of MOT, I picked up some early insights into Jewish culture. What happens on Shabbat, the concept of treif, the astounding length of summer camp, and the belief that if it's not boiled, it can't call itself a bagel. But when it comes to my personal Jewish cultural education, if a couple of years in North Dallas brought Judaism onto my radar, moving into University Towers on West Campus in Austin made me basically Gilda Radner. A few days into sorority rush, I decided I was in over my head and made the decision to drop out. One of my brand new AE Phi neighbors said to me, "Oh, Dina, what about Phi? Are you sure you're not Jewish?" I was sure that I wasn't Jewish, but she got me thinking that maybe I was a little Jew-ish. It was Towers where I met Brian Miller. This boy was not particularly religious. He wasn't rebelling by dating me. But being his girlfriend in that environment made me suddenly aware of religion in a way I had never been before. While the Jewish kids were wrapped in a feeling of sameness and belonging, I felt almost insecure. I had never given a thought to the religion of a guy that I liked. And here I was, feeling like people could somehow physically see our religious differences. "She's not Jewish," echoed in my thoughts as I dramatically imagined a scarlet olive emblazoned on my chest. We broke up. And then promptly, perhaps 48 hours later, we got over our dramatic leanings and said, "This is dumb. Quitting on a future together because we have different religious backgrounds doesn't make any sense for us." From that point on, we both kind of unconsciously began to get comfortable defining our ish. In Jewish circles, we got good at making the joke about the shiksa before someone else could. In non-Jewish circles, we were vocal about Brian's lifelong bacon consumption. We turned the scarlet olive into a badge of honor, almost kind of daring someone to say something. Because not only were we comfortable enough to make all the jokes about it, we had the answers that made sense to us. Haters be damned. Eventually, we got engaged and took that vim and vigor straight into the planning of a hybrid Catholic-Jewish wedding. How hard could it be? Well, apparently neither Catholicism nor Judaism felt quite the same way we did on the hybrid concept. The Catholic priest from the Michigan parish I had grown up in actually came on board pretty quickly. He had crossed over to the land of interfaith unions for several couples before us. The rabbi was harder to come by. Since the wedding would be in Dallas, we were basically looking for a rabbi willing to marry a couple he'd never met, only one of them Jewish, in a shared ceremony with a Catholic priest. So it was admittedly a tough ask. In the end, it was lovely. We had a reading from the Corinthians. We broke the glass. And the sermon the priest gave even involved the presentation of a challah. Certainly not a Jewish wedding, yet decidedly Jew-ish. We were married for 5 years before having any babies. We were busy with friends and jobs and weekend travel to everyone else's weddings. There was an ease in our mostly religionless coexistence during those years, but I think we both had a sense of wanting to belong to religious congregations, even if it was as simple as having a place to attend holiday services. We officially joined a Catholic church with the filling out of a few forms. On the Judaism front, we went first to the conservative congregation where Brian had grown up. You know how they say that you may not remember exactly what someone says, but you'll remember how it made you feel? Well, our initial interaction there left us with a strong feeling that it was not where we belonged. They made it pretty clear that they weren't at all on board with the ish. At first, I think we were insulted, which became kind of a low-level anger, resentment, and then eventually a sadness regarding the idea that a Jew marrying a non-Jew was seen as ultimately losing the Jew. But eventually, we shrugged and concluded that if you're going to have a Catholic wife, you'd probably need to identify as Reform, and we wound up in the lap of Emmanuel. We paid our junior membership dues and spent those few years attending services on high holidays without much ado. And then we started to talk about a family. We realized that while we could remain our own separate religions forever and ever, we couldn't avoid the conversation about what that meant for a new human who would be half of each of us. When we boiled it down, our main desire was that our kids have one religious identity, as opposed to being nothing or a confusing/conflicting version of both, even if that meant that one of us would have to be the odd man out. We'd gotten good at finding the sameness in our backgrounds over the years, and the root story of both our religions was pretty significant common ground. I didn't see the decision to raise my kids Jewish as conceding, but more as growing a family based on the 10 Commandments that we'd both grown up learning and living. I remember there being an actual moment where I, in effect, made up my mind. I came in from another room, and I looked at Brian and I said, I can raise Jewish children. I want them to have the names of Catholic saints. They will sit like little angels every year at Christmas Eve Mass, and I will never not put pork in my meatballs. He nodded his agreement. We had a deal. Finally expecting, we attended an evening class here at Emmanuel with Rabbi Walter. It was called So You're Having a Jewish Baby. We interacted with other naive first baby couples. We touched on genetic testing and pregnancy superstitions and got a checklist for bris preparations. We also got something we didn't know that our hearts actually needed: the implied blessing from Rabbi Walter that a Catholic girl could have a Jewish baby. We found out we were having a boy. We would name him Vincent Michael in memory of my grandfather and in accordance with the saint agreement. His due date was December 20th. As that day got closer, I started to do the subconscious Jewish baby boy math. Due date plus 7 days equals bris. In what now seems like an obvious nod from the universe, he was born on December 18th. And we had a Christmas Day bris. And we served my mom's lasagna to our guests. Don't worry, no pork. It was our first significant moment as parents of a Jewish child in a Jewish life. A few years later, we had Dominic Anthony, named after my other grandfather this time, but still in accordance with the saint agreement. His bris was uneventful, which is funny because if you guys know him, you're aware that his very existence can be quite an event. During our preschool and elementary school years, we not only got the hang of answering questions, but found that those questions helped us hone our family's particular facts. Daddy is Jewish, and so are we. Mommy is Catholic, but knows more than Daddy does about most Jewish things. Yes, we get presents for Hanukkah and Christmas. Yes, we'll have bar mitzvahs. Yes, we eat dinner with like 100 people in Rosh Hashanah. Yes, we've been known to make a Seder plate one night and hunt for pastel eggs the next morning. Yes, singing the Shema to little people at bedtime makes non-Jews kind of teary too. The boys are now middle and high school, and I love to watch them continually learn to navigate their places in their various worlds. I'd say that our current family view of religion is less about doctrine or observance and more about overall spirit. With that approach, it isn't difficult to be not that religiously Catholic and a not that religiously Jewish family. The structure and consistency of a Catholic Mass still do comfort me, though, and I take myself to church when I feel like I need that, and when my parents are in town. Ultimately, we are blessed by extended families who have let us do our thing without judgment, by so many friends who also live some version of a religious or cultural mashup, by a school that expects kids to question everything and discuss anything, and by a congregation that has, intentionally or not, made us feel like it's okay to be Jewish. So while we may not ever have all the answers, and there's a decent amount of making it up as we go along on most days, I can say this. When a Judaics class project asks students to talk about their family's traditions and values, it feels like we're doing okay when my kid answers, "Our family is big on eating, rooting for the Longhorns, and trying to be decent humans."
Good afternoon. My name is Keenan Chason. And when I was in 6th grade, my social studies teacher, during a lesson on world religions, asked our class what religion we would choose to be if we could pick one that was different from the one we were born with. I was the first to speak up, and I remember saying that I would want to be Jewish, to which she smiled and said, "You know, in America, you can be any religion you want." I think I replied with something about wanting to be a Jewish Buddhist. I don't exactly know why I had decided that I wanted to be Jewish when I was 12. My only previous references to anything Jewish were playing dreidel in elementary school and the movie The Jazz Singer. I guess I would describe it as just a little stir of the soul that pulled me to lean in that direction. The following year, I moved schools and made my first Jewish friend, Alex from Buffalo, New York. We initially bonded over the fact that we were both new to the school, and upon learning that he was Jewish, I immediately dubbed him my best friend. He was a great friend, and I'm eternally thankful to his mother, Joanne, who would invite me along with them to temple for Saturday morning Shabbat services, where I would get the privilege of going to Hebrew school. I, unlike my friend, was ecstatic to tag along to Hebrew school and learn religion from such a different perspective. To my astonishment, questioning the teacher was not only respected but encouraged. I remember thinking, these teachers are awesome. I had always been attracted to Judaism, but that experience gave me a deeper sense of connection than I had ever felt before. I was able to see the inside of a sanctuary for the first time. I was not only able to see and hold a yarmulke for the first time, I was given one to wear. And because we were at a Reform temple, we were given the choice as to whether we wore one or not. I never understood why anyone would refuse such an honor. You get to wear a piece of garb that signifies belonging to a special people. By the time Alex became a bar mitzvah, I was one of two friends who had the privilege of being invited to the Shabbat service where he was given an aliyah. And I felt so honored to get to see my friend up on the bima. It felt so special to witness. And I remember thinking about how exciting it will be when I get to have an aliyah. And then feeling sad that I wasn't going to have one. And then feeling utterly heartbroken that I wasn't born Jewish, that I could never be Jewish, and that I could never be part of this ancient family. Of course, I was making an erroneous assumption, one that a lot of people all too often make, which is that all Jews are white. My father's heritage is French-Canadian and Scottish, and my mother's is Mexican-American. When I was in elementary school, probably around 3rd or 4th grade, I remember I had a few friends who were what you might call white, and I can remember that they would always remind me that I wasn't white. I don't know exactly how they knew, but they somehow knew that I was Hispanic. I also remember several of my Hispanic friends who referred to me as that white boy, so I remember having trouble understanding which color I was. I remember asking my mom what color I was. Am I white? Am I not? If I'm not white, what am I? And she said, what color do you think you are? To which I responded, I think I'm peach. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so I must have been in about 3rd grade or so. I didn't really feel these things, however, until I got older, and I started realizing that there were certain advantages to passing as white. While it is definitely helpful to be able to properly pronounce Spanish words without even being slightly fluent in the language, or being able to drop well-placed cultural inside jokes with other Hispanic people, I know that it is absolutely nothing like the privileges afforded to me by my, at times, perceived whiteness. It was hard for me as a kid, who had thought of himself as being both white and a little bit Mexican, to realize that some people view these things as having to be mutually exclusive. As an adult, I've actually heard people say things like, you can't be Jewish, you're not white. And how will you raise a Jewish family if you're Hispanic? As if those two facts could not coexist. By the end of junior high, Alex moved, I changed schools again, and I didn't get to go to Hebrew school anymore. I didn't have any other Jewish people in my life until sophomore year in high school. My music theory teacher, Mr. Levin, who once sat me down and told me I was the kind of person who would either create the cure for cancer or the next atomic bomb. His hyperbole came as a response to my academic achievements being undermined by a streak of reckless behavior. I was just returning to school from having been temporarily expelled, and within 2 weeks I had already been suspended. And so Mr. Levin made it his personal goal to open my eyes to why a life without values doesn't serve anyone. I only wish I had been mature enough at the time to truly understand his gem of a lesson. When I graduated from high school, I moved out of my parents' house and went straight off to college. And being away from home was both exciting and challenging. I discovered an emptiness that would soon pervade every aspect of my life. With independence came freedom. Freedom brought a struggle for purpose. And soon I began to withdraw from the world, every day feeling more and more like a ghost or somebody's shadow. I moved to London, then to Paris. I was living my dream, and still I was the most alone I had ever been in my entire life. And then one day I reconnected with an old friend that I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. When Caitlin and I started talking, I felt more alive every day. I was completely unaware of how the universe would bring us together in the years to come. I came back to Texas in spring of 2019 and moved back in with my parents. I got a job and things became more stable, and I had a chance to breathe and reflect on the quality of life that I had been living. And suddenly I felt afraid of everything. I didn't know where to turn, and so I looked up. And when I did, I guess I had a moment of what you might call radical awe. I had this feeling of being connected to the source of everything, and I questioned myself, what if this is not what I think it is? And I felt the answer come back clear as day. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it is what it is. It always is what it always has been and always will be. I decided that I wanted to start learning about Judaism again. Another little stir of the soul. I chose to try eating kosher. I didn't know anything about kashrut, but I began questioning everything I ate, and in doing so, injected a little holiness into my everyday life. Not only did I feel healthier, but I also started making better health choices overall. My self-control was put into check by an ancient religious practice, and I began to see Judaism literally working in my life, but not without struggle. The problem was I began to feel very alone in my experience. Eventually, I made the decision to tell Caitlin about what was happening to me. I didn't plan what I was going to say. Instead, I just spoke from the heart and ended up expressing, for the first time in my life, my desire to convert to Judaism. She was like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." And her reaction of curiosity and excitement soon became a driving force that helped me forward when I felt disconnected. Judaism became something we shared. And about a month later, we realized we'd be sharing Judaism with more than just each other, as we found out we were having a baby. It became clear to me that if I wanted to be Jewish, then I had to really understand that I would be now not just affecting myself and my relationship with Caitlin, but also that of our child, which I was personally unprepared to start thinking about at the ripe old age of 25 years old. Suddenly, Jewish practice took on an entirely new dimension. For instance, I was unsure how we would navigate the already tense holiday season. I knew my parents and Caitlin's parents would want to celebrate Christmas with us, but I wasn't aware of how far they would want to take things with our children. I began to regard candy cane-themed fabrics and anything Santa-related with a more watchful eye. After all, it was up to me to protect the Jewish identity of our family. At least that's how I saw it back then. I had begun to hit a plateau in terms of reading and experimenting with Judaism, and it was now time to actually go out and find a synagogue and meet other Jews. I remember thinking that I would go back to the temple that my friend and I went to all those years ago, but then I was also wondering if I'd be limiting myself by not at least trying one other synagogue before making a decision. So I found one online, and contacted someone there, and we went to a few Shabbat services, which were for some reason really nerve-wracking at first for Caitlin and I. Or maybe just me. I just remember thinking, are we supposed to be here? And Caitlin was really great about ensuring me that everything was okay. After maybe our second time going, I met up with the contact I'd made and got invited to study Torah the next Saturday morning. I was ecstatic. There was coffee, bagels and lox, great conversation. It was really such a special experience the few times that I had the privilege of attending. I thought, hey, maybe this is it. It may have been, but then one day I somehow came across a Facebook event that had something about a synagogue celebrating its 75th anniversary. All are welcome. Come on down and celebrate. At least that's the message that I took from it. When I arrived at Emmanuel for the first time, I remember feeling immediately excited, like I was coming home after a long absence. The service was beautiful, and the oneg afterward was friendly and welcoming. That's what came to mind that first time, and every time we came to Emmanuel after. This place is so welcoming. Pretty soon, I began taking Caitlin with me to services, and she felt that same welcoming energy I had felt too. Eventually, I decided to take a leap and reach out to the clergy about beginning the process of conversion. Taking basic Judaism at Emmanuel was a huge step forward for me and Caitlin on our journey toward becoming a Jewish family. We learned so much that we couldn't have learned just from reading books, and perhaps most importantly, we were educated on practices specific to Reform Judaism. One large part of that being the observance of holidays. I had this malformed belief that the Jewish identity of my future children would be compromised if they celebrated any holidays other than Jewish ones. Basic Judaism gave me the vocabulary to talk about and find meaning in all of our holidays, but it took an extra bit of effort on my part to strike a balance with the holidays of our families. After much consideration, we took the approach that these holidays are important to our families and that they experience joy in sharing them with us, just as we do when sharing Jewish holidays with them. In the end, I learned that there's so much more to gain by celebrating the positive values we share with our families rather than focusing on our differences. I owe a huge thank you to Rabbi Silk, who, after becoming my rabbi, guided me in becoming an educated, empathic, and accepting Jew. The road was fraught with many challenges, both social and spiritual, and every step of the way, Rabbi Silk was there to help me through those difficulties. When I struggled with talking to my family about conversion, she was there to help me find the words that I needed. When I found myself experiencing a crisis of values, she turned me on to the awesome Jewish spiritual practice of Musar. And when I was unable to sit still on my long wait toward becoming a dad, she helped me get the most out of my practice of counting the Omer. The first time I counted the Omer was, for me, an opportunity to explore myself and my world through reading or doing something Jewish every day, and then journaling about it later. It was also a way for me to count down from Passover to my fiance's due date, which was exactly on Shavuot that year. So it was a perfect way to sort of temper my excitement as I made the journey toward becoming a father. We had moved into a small trailer out in Needville, rent-free, thanks to her dad, where we had our first ever Shabbat dinner as a couple. After our first Passover, a virtual Seder for two provided by Emmanuel, I began meditating daily on each of the 49 days leading up to Shavuot, also known as counting the Omer. It was the perfect countdown to lead me toward the freedom of parenthood. I know it sounds like a contradiction, the freedom of parenthood. But becoming a parent meant that I could be free from the bondage of not knowing my life's purpose. I had been flitting from one thing to the next, shackled under a translucent ceiling, trying to hold on to something real. The moment my daughter, Ruth, was born, I was free from that. She became my life's purpose, and with her, my small but growing family. I'm reminded of a keynote address by Neil Gaiman in 2012 at University of the Arts, where he likens his goal of where he wants to be in life to a mountain. He says, "And I knew that as long as I kept walking towards the mountain, I would be all right. And when I truly was not sure what to do, I could stop and think about whether it was taking me towards or away from the mountain. My little family had become my mountain." So when it came to counting the Omer from Passover to Shavuot, the journey from slavery to freedom, I took it very seriously as a chance to do some honest self-reflection before becoming a father. I had an alarm set around 7 p.m. every day that would remind me to stop everything I was doing and start journaling on things like love and discipline or power and beauty, but all through a Jewish lens. Rabbi Silk recommended a beautiful book that served as a really helpful guide called Omer, Accounting by Rabbi Karen Kater. After our daughter Ruth was born, we began to find a rhythm of Jewish practice that felt natural to us and was authentically ours. It was really lovely when we found ourselves hosting Shabbat dinners with actual guests and introducing Jewish holidays to our friends and family. And just as we began finding our footing as a family of 3, we then found out we were about to be a family of 4. We were just around the corner of Caitlin's second trimester of pregnancy when we had come to find one morning that the house we'd been living in, a little farmhouse not 100 yards from the trailer, also in Needville, also rent-free, thank you, Caitlin's dad, had become subject to a snake infestation. I'll never forget the scream Caitlin let out that morning when she found the snake's freshly shed skin draped over the clothes we'd had hanging in the closet. We had withstood so many hardships with that place, but that was our final straw. We packed what we could and never slept there again. By this time, we'd gotten our careers on track, but moving our growing family of 3, soon to be 4, back into my parents' house was extremely difficult. She and I were doing whatever we could to keep our careers afloat and still feel like good parents while basically living out of a suitcase. And then my car gets totaled in a flash flood. I'm only beginning to catch my breath from life spinning out from under me, and then my grandfather passed away. It was an incredibly eye-opening moment. There I was in the span of 3 weeks, no house, no car, no grandpa. The worst part was I wasn't sure how to properly mourn him. I wanted to do so in a way that felt authentic to the customs of my growing faith, but that also honored him and his life. He was an evangelical Christian, and when he was alive, I was terrified to tell him about my decision to become a Jew. Yet when I did tell him, he showed me nothing but love and respect. And for the first time, we sat and talked at great length about our religious values. Rather than try to convert me or urge me to turn back before it was too late, he sought to understand me and learn more about my journey. In the end, I was able to honor him by being given the great privilege of writing his obituary. Eventually, I let the expectations of how I was supposed to grieve, my shoulds, as I called them, fall away. I mourn in a way that makes sense to me. In January, my daughter and I celebrated conversion together, and about a week later, Caitlin and I's second daughter, Maggie, was born, fully Jewish. It was a moment of light for our family during a dark time. Jewish values became the glue that holds our family together. Our values gave us context, purpose, and intentionality as we navigated through the stress of buying our first real home. They allowed us to summon the strength we needed to pursue difficult career changes while raising 2 small children, and gave us the words we needed when a return to wholeness was what we had written on our hearts. And let's not forget the adorable image of our toddler waving the light in front of her eyes and doing her best to sing along on Friday night. We are eternally thankful to this congregation and everything it stands for. Thank you for creating such a warm and welcoming environment. It is truly a beautiful thing to be part of this community, and it has been such an honor to tell my story. Thank you for listening. Shalom.
Geraldine and Malia, Dina and Keenan, thank you for sharing your heart, You're courageous to tell your story on this day. And as I had shared with you, the reason I asked you to do that is because it's a source of inspiration for all of us to have a sense of pride of this community that we are a part of, and to recognize that sitting amongst us at any time are people who might be considering Judaism or who are here with their Jewish family. And the gift that we have to offer is also the gift that we receive, which is to have you in our midst, because we are better together. I wish you a great rest of the day. Our schedule will pop up on the screen. We are ending a few minutes late. There are 3 fantastic opportunities that begin in just a few minutes. In the Proler Chapel, Rabbi Walter and Stephanie Carlson are teaching a session that is about Zionism. There's a meditation led by Ann Friedman in the boardroom. And in the Ashman Multipurpose Room, Emmanuel Votes Expo. There will be no programming in this space until our healing service, which is at 3:30.